Okay. As I was just mentioning, I don't think I'm going to start with the second PPT, which relates to paradigms and epistemologies of research, reframing the standard picture. But I want to actually take forward some of the critical considerations that I have tried to forward in the last two classes, right? And this lecture that I'm going to give you is going to explicitly address this question of fusing epistemology and ontology that I invoked in the last class, right? I mean, I gave you some sense of the issues involved in the demand to fuse epistemology and ontology, questions of what there is, the ontological question, and questions of how do I know, or the sources of knowledge, the epistemological question. I also pointed out that many times in philosophical and other kinds of inquiry, even as people try to fuse ontological questions and epistemological questions, many times that fusing is done from the epistemological side of things, right? Okay, so invariably, or many times, the question of existing is reduced to the question of knowing. Okay, so knowing becomes the measure of existence, right? And the epistemological project designs itself around that kind of reduction, right? And I think there are problems with that reduction, etc. Okay, now I mean, for instance, when people make distinctions between different kinds of objects, say, when people refer to, the objects of scientific inquiry, or social scientific inquiry, whether they refer to numbers, classes, causes, rocks, material, magnetic fields, electrons, gases, minds, people, etc., you will find that the objects of scientific and social scientific inquiry are often, invoked in ways in which our knowledge can deal with it, right, etc. All right. So you find that how objects exist is made subservient to our ways of knowing, right, as it were, and that's why I think there is something in the epistemological emphasis that we need to be very about, right? I think we had a fairly engaging discussion on this theme towards the end of the last class, and the considerations that I'm going to forward in this class are not just a response to the critical discussion that we had. I think it's also trying to take forward some of the critical considerations that loom large within this course, right? So I'm going to, I'm not seeing this lecture as a digression. I'm seeing this as quite central to the kind of demands of fusing epistemology and ontology is concerned, right? And I've said that one of the rationale for the course is actually to fuse questions of epistemology with questions of ontology. But maybe in the context of the course, erring more on the epistemological side than on the ontological side, but not discounting the focus on the ontological, the modes of existence of objects and so on, right? But I think there are implications that follow when you try to, in a sense, address modes of existing through the tools of knowing, and that anything exists because it can be known or made known. So somewhere the privileging of the tools of inquiry can kind of mediate the ways in which we begin to access objects, analyze objects and phenomena, and so on, right? So what I'm going to offer you today in today's class is invoking what in recent times has been called the ontological turn, right? In the humanities and social sciences, right? And somewhere along the way, I think there are some very interesting issues that the ontological turn represents for the humanities and the social sciences, right? Etc. Okay, so I think it's, of course, I'm not trying to endorse this ontological turn lock, stock, and barrel. Rather, what I'm trying to do is, from within the kind of emphasis in our course, also take on some of the insights of the ontological turn, right? Now, if you want a very good textbook, a kind of a textbook on the ontological turn, especially in the context of anthropology, there is this book written by Holbrad, Holbrad, Martin Holbrad, and Pedersen, and I forget the first part of the name, Pedersen, Pedersen, right? It's a book called The Ontological Turn, and basically speaking of the ontological turn in the context of anthropology, but it does invoke wider aspects of the ontological turn across the humanities and the social sciences, although it concentrates on anthropology in particular, right? There are also, you Google ontological turn, you will get a whole lot of stuff available to you, but be a little careful in accessing that stuff. The book that I mentioned to you by Holbrad and Pedersen, Pedersen, is a useful read, right? I think we need to be a little careful about taking on board all the implications of the ontological turn, just as we need to be also a little careful about taking on board everything about the privileging of epistemology over ontology. Ideally, we should be kind of combining our concern with the tools of knowing with the modes of existing, fusing epistemology and ontology. So I think that's going to be the crux of what I'm going to say in today's class, etc. So in a sense, it takes forward certain considerations that I've already tried to highlight for you, right? I know there is no PPT available on this for your easy access, but I think I'll speak at length on this so that it becomes easy for you all to access the idea that I'm trying to forward for you, right? Right now, evidently, our course, Knowing the Social World, Epistemologies for the Social Sciences, is focusing on the variety of epistemologies that are available and can be used within social scientific inquiry, right? But in recent times, across domains of research, and investigation, a new line of investigation or a new line of interest has developed with relation to matters of ontology, of existence, modes of existing, of being, and so on. Right? That's why what has come to be called the ontological turn, and put this within quotes, the ontological turn, okay, has come to acquire an interesting significance, right? In fact, it lies at the heart of a lot of the investigations, empirical investigations that are proceeding in and across the humanities and the social sciences. In fact, some of the ideas that I invoked as part of the post-critical social science, at least some parts of claims for a post-critical social science are also translating into the emphasis on taking the object seriously and not reducing the object merely to our tools of inquiry and so on. Okay, so I think it's important to take note of this turn to ontology, okay, while also reflecting on the sensibilities and also evaluating some of the nuances that outline, that are the basis of this turn to ontology and the new approach to the idea of the social world, or the idea of the world itself, is being composed, right? Okay. Now, in fact, in the earlier class, I did mention is that many times when people reflect on the social sciences, including the sciences, there is a tendency to privilege epistemology over ontology, right? That there is a tendency to subordinate ontological questions about what there is, to questions about how they can be known, and so on. That's why this new interest in ontology, I mean, against this background, this new interest in ontology marks a shift of emphasis, right? There is a reverse shift from from epistemology to ontology, right? So what should we be making of this renewed interest in matters of ontology, right? Okay, and I'm going to address this question from within the ideas that I have tried to express as part of the course rationale in the past two classes. Okay, now, what is this shift, this reverse shift from from epistemology to ontology about? What is this turn to ontology, the shift from epistemology to ontology? What is this all about, right? Now I think one of the key elements and I think one of the key aspects or central aspects of the ontological investigations across various fields of study, okay, is to avoid being caught up, and this is important, to avoid, there is a desire among scholars who are part of the ontological turn, okay, to avoid being caught up in the description and qualification of perspectives, right, etc. Right? That, in other words, it is argued that the privileging of epistemology privileges modes of seeing the world, perspectives on the world, right, etc. So there is a tendency in the epistemological emphasis to emphasize the description and qualification of perspectives, that these perspectives yield our understanding of the world, right? So there is a world, and there are different perspectives that you can bring on it, etc. Now, what the ontological turn is doing is trying to avoid this tendency to be caught up in descriptions and qualifications of perspectives on the world, right? In other words, let me put it the same point differently, that the turn to ontology is an effort to kind of circumvent, or short circuit, move away from epistemology and its language of perspectives, of representation, okay, in favor of an approach which focuses directly on the composition of the world, right, etc. Okay, Now, and that's why it's one thing to say that there is a world and there are perspectives that we bring to the world, right? And a lot of the emphasis on epistemology goes with that emphasis, that there is a world out there and we bring different perspectives to the world. So there is a certain representation of the world in a particular kind of a way. And what the ontological turn does is to reverse this emphasis on perspectives that yield our knowledge of the world into more directly accessing, okay, the world itself, right? In fact, I make this point that a lot of modern Western philosophy, okay, actually shapes itself around the question of knowledge, right? There is a kind of a conversion, right, of ontological questions into epistemological questions, right, etc. Okay. Now, what you find in the ontological turn is to reverse this tendency, right? And so on. So let me explain this as we go along. I mean, it's one thing to say that the world, okay, is a consequence of our perspectives that we bring to it. It's another to say that the world itself, is something that is independent of the perspectives that we bring to it. So if the world is multiple, in the last class, Nabhanita used the word ontological pluralism, etc. If there are many worlds, the multiplicity of the worlds is not a consequence of the perspectives that is constituting this multiplicity. The world itself is multiple, right? So it's not our perspectives that is bringing diversity into the world. The world itself is multiple and diverse, right? Etc. So you find that it's important to understand the nature of this shift, right? And now that's why, in the context of let me backtrack. I mean, are there any initial clarifications? I think I've been fairly clear up to now, but are there any confusions or any clarifications that you would want at this point? Any of you? Okay, let me proceed further. Now, in the context of the ontological turn, the dominant tendency, okay, is to rephrase questions. The dominant tendency is to argue that if the world is multiple, because it is ontologically so. It is not multiple because we are looking at the world from different viewpoints, and the world appears differently from different viewpoints, right? That's why the ontological term tries to kind of short circuit the dominant epistemological tendency to see the world as a consequence of our perspectives on it, etc. And so you find that the ontological turn is very alert to the kind of difference, right, that is there in the worlds that are being addressed, right? And that this difference is not a consequence of or a result of the perspectives that we are bringing to it, etc. So it's not our worldview. Because we look at the world from one vantage point, the world appears so. The world itself is multiple, etc. Right? So you find that in the context of the ontological term, the dominant epistemological tendency to see questions of reality, okay, as questions about the ways in which reality is represented, that is overruled by the ontological term, right? Or overruled, or if I might put it, short-circuited, right? It addresses the world in itself and argues that the world, there are many worlds. The world itself is multiple, and it's not our perspectives that are producing the world as multiple. So if you have to be alert to the difference between different worlds, right, then this alertness to the difference between different worlds cannot come by just refining our perspectives on it, and so on. Now, for instance, let me give you an illustration. Now, for instance, there are many cultures where the human world and the non-human world merge. I mean, there are, or the distinction between the human world and the non-human world is not drawn in hard ways, right? The human exists with a sense of the non-human, as it were, right? So somewhere along the way, if you have to be, if you have to be alert to this structuring of the world, then we cannot work with the kind of dualisms that we work with as part of the modern ontological world, which argues that the world of the human is distinct from the world of the animate or the non-human, and so on, right, etc. Okay, so you find that in the context of the ontological term, there is an alertness to the forms of differences which cannot be reduced to a disparity or a dualism of worldviews. Okay, now, and that it is important to address the world in itself, and that the world in itself, it can be multiple, and it is not our theory or our perspectives that is constituting them as show. Right now, so you find, you can see that the focus within the emphasis on ontology is to focus on world making, right? And that there are many worlds that we need to address, these many worlds are not a consequence of the kind of epistemological tools that we bring to it, and so on. Okay, so it's one thing to speak of one world represented in multiple ways from different perspectives. It's quite another to speak about many worlds. And the ontological term is actually speaking about many worlds as opposed to, right, one world represented in multiple ways from different perspectives. Now, for instance, how would you distinguish between, say, the modern world and the non-modern world, right? One might argue from within a modern perspective, there is only one world. Look, and maybe traditional people look at that world in one kind of way, and non-modern people look at the world in another kind of a way, right? The ontological turn will say, no, no, it is not the perspectives that translate into the division of worlds. The worlds themselves, the non-modern world, is structured very differently from the modern world, etc. Okay, so you find that to speak about many worlds, right? And not quite one world represented in multiple ways from different perspectives raises some very interesting possibilities, right? Etc. Okay, so how do you think of the human world, right? And it's one, and what do we make of the modern tendency to set apart the human world separate from the natural world, right? Whereas there are worlds, okay, coexisting with the modern world, which argues that this differentiation between the human world and the natural world cannot be sustained at all, right? Etc. So you find that the purpose of a lot of ontological investigations clearly, okay, is not, I mean, it's not trying to provide more satisfactory answers. The purpose of ontological investigations clearly is not to provide more satisfactory answers to traditional epistemological questions. Rather, it is actually trying to displace the framework from which the epistemological, traditional epistemological questions are being posed, right? Etc. So the effort is to displace the framework which gave those epistemological questions the kind of centrality that was ascribed. So you find in the interest in ontology across different fields of inquiry, is that you need to be alert, to the multiplicity and the degrees of difference, that participate in the world of objects, both human and non-human, and that we need to refine our tools to such a world which makes sense of the multiplicity of objects, both human and non-human, which are part of the world, right? That's why there is within the ontological term, or this emphasis on ontology, a renewed attention to the objects of inquiry, right? I mean, it's one thing to say that our objects are given. It's quite another to address the objects as they get to be made, as it were, right? So you find the ontological term, by focusing a renewed critical attention upon objects, sees these objects as neither finished nor ready-made nor given, as it were. Rather, it addresses the modes of existing of the objects themselves, right? So you find that even the most mundane entities, the most mundane objects, once you probe the ontology of these most mundane objects, then this investigation into the ontology of mundane entities serves to display the multiplicity of realities hidden under the everyday, right? Etc. etc. So you find that there is, I mean, that that the focus on ontology is a focus on a method or a methodology which draws attention to the kind of potential, actual and potential, that exists within realities, as it were, right? And so on. So that's why everything becomes significant in the scheme of the ontological turn, right? And somewhere along the way, that's why, for instance, there are efforts today to rewrite the history of partition through objects that not just the people who were affected by partition riots, etc., but also the objects that were, even certain goods, certain objects that were part of that charged times, and sometimes just one object can trigger a whole memory about events, and so on. And in fact, there is some time back I happened to read a book which is actually talking about partition and the experience of the partition, not only through the memories of people who lived through the partition violence, but also talking at it in terms of the different tools and objects that were part of the charged memory, charged times that was the partition, right? Etc. So why do people cling on when they are displaced? Why do people cling on to certain kinds of objects, etc.? And how those objects begin to re-invoke a certain kind of a memory, and so on. So the word object comes to acquire a new resonance in this ontological turn. In the epistemological turn, the epistemology also devotes its question to the object, right? But many times the challenge within the epistemological focus on the object is to look at the object not in terms of how it exists, but in how the object can be made known. That's why it is argued the human object cannot be addressed by the tools of natural science. There is a new science that we need to address the human object, and so on. So it's the modes of knowing that yield our sense of the objects. What the ontological turn does is, no, it's not our modes of knowing that need to be refined only to address objects. The objects themselves, need to be addressed differently. That's why there is a displacement. That's why I said the framework of the epistemological question is actually being reframed from within the ontological picture. Okay, now that's why investigating the composition of realities, right? The composition of realities, is crucial within the ontological turn, rather than seeing any given reality as ordered or complete in itself, right? That things are constantly being made and remade, right? It's almost as though nature itself is an unstable equilibrium, as it were. So once you begin to address nature as an unstable equilibrium, then you are addressing modes of transition within nature itself. And this is about the natural world. You can only assume how much more complex the human world can tend to become, right? So the purpose of researching ontology, it is argued, is not to arrive at a better formulation of the reality of the world, or the ways in which the world is real. Rather, the purpose of researching ontology, is to question the assumption, right? Is to displace the assumption, of a singular ordered world and to re-specify the ways in which the world itself is ordered and so on, right? That's why, for instance, for instance, you can look at science, right? And try to write a history of science through the laboratory, right? And surely writing a history of science through what actually gets transacted in the laboratory is very different from some of our more idealized images of what gets transacted in the world of science, right? Etc. Okay, that's why the renowned science and technology studies scholar Bruno Latour, that I mentioned in the last class as well, has actually tried to point out that that the ontological turn, through its renewed attention to the objects of science, gives us some real idea about the world that is science in itself, right? So I think there are some very interesting challenges that come in the context of this ontological turn. But there are some cautionary notes that I want to strike. But before I move into those cautionary notes that I want to strike, are there any clarifications, further clarifications, or doubts that you want to clarify? Please, because I've just presented the implications of the ontological turn, etc. And please note, it's not as though the question of knowing is being discounted. It's rather, it's arguing that existing is so existence, modes of existence is itself so complex that we have to renew the tools of inquiry, right? Constantly keep renewing the tools of inquiry if you have to actually make sense of the objects of inquiry and so on. So the object makes demands on us, okay, and somewhere along the way, the object has a primacy, and our perspectives are secondary to it, right? In the epistemological turn, our perspectives become foundational, and the object, the modes in which they exist, become secondary to our modalities of knowing. What the ontological turn is actually reversing that tendency, as it were. And I think it's a subtle shift. It's a very subtle shift, but it's the subtlety of the shift should not in any way imply that there is a certain overturning of our ways in which we begin to think about social science or about inquiry in general, right? Are there any doubts, clarifications? Anybody? Yes, Rose.
Sir, so when we have two perspectives about a thing, say A and B, so it is two perspectives about one thing. So it's about knowing the same thing in two perspectives, right? So when ontological turn comes, does it say that these two perspectives are two worlds or two things when they exist?
Yeah, no, I mean, see, what the ontological turn tells us is that it is not, I mean, it is not one world and two perspectives on it. It's actually two worlds. So the perspectives are worlds in themselves, right? So what you have summarized for me is quite adequate for our purposes. But the point is the focus on representation, right? I mean, see, look at what is the emphasis within epistemology. How do I know something? How do I master something? How do I classify something? How do I represent the world, right? okay, there is a world, and there is a world that there is a world out there, and there is also something that appears to me as the world. Now, in the epistemological turn, this what appears to be is also given a certain kind of a status, and many times the world is being rendered from what we make of it, right, etc. So in the ontological turn, what we make of it is not separated from the world itself. In that sense, you're right in what you have summarized, in juxtaposing the epistemological against the ontological.
So one more thing, I'm not sure if this is the right example, but when I just try to understand, something which comes to my mind is, I have a glass with some water in it. So I can take two perspectives. I can understand it as half full or half empty, but then it's just one glass of water. So how do we understand this? It's one glass of water, but then you take two perspectives to understand it. But in existence, it's only one thing.
No, but surely the glass of water is in the world, right?
Yes,
The glass of water is in the world, and somewhere along the way, it's also important. I think the perspective that you see, whether you see it as half full or half empty, right, is important. Nobody denies that, right?
Yes.
Nobody denies that. But the world in which the glass of water obtains, right, has to also to be addressed. So the world is not being completed by just rendering it as half full or half empty. Right? I mean, there is more to the world than just rendering it as half full and half empty. Now, if you privilege the rendition, half full and half empty, then you are in a sense privileging the perspective that you're bringing to it. Right?
Okay, sir.
You're getting what I'm saying?
Ha.
Okay. So somewhere the world, I mean, so yes, you're talking of one glass of water, right? But the glass of water obtains somewhere. It's not hanging loose. Yes, our perspectives are that's why, for instance, it would be interesting to see how a poet would look at a glass of water. For instance, in fact, there is a wonderful story of Picasso, looking at a photograph, and responding to a photograph, and then he sees something in a photograph, okay, that others don't see, right? And please note, it's not as though it is his seeing that is giving a new reality to the photograph. The photograph itself incorporates that aspect of the real which Picasso sees and not somebody else, right? Of course, but then we may say, no, Picasso sees this, what others don't see, right? That's why I gave you the example in the last class about Michelangelo rendering his sculptural creations as not his creations, but actually there in nature, and that he's only chipping away at its edges, right? So it's not our agency. Please, perspectives is agential. Our view of the world is seen to make the world what it is. I'm not saying that how the world appears to us is unimportant. I'm not saying that. Nor does the ontological turn say that how the world appears to us is unimportant, right? It only points out that somewhere the world as it appears to us, okay, is not the whole world. There is more to the world than what appears to us, and that if you want to account for the world as it appears to us, then you also have to recognize something more to the world than what it appears to us. Yes, Rauna.
Sir, if it's not a problem, could you explain your response to Rose's question once more?
Sorry?
Sir, if it's not a problem, sir, could you explain your response to the question Rose just asked a minute ago? Your response to the question that Rose asked? Could you just explain the response one more time, if that's okay?
Yeah. I can. I mean, she gave the example of the glass existing out there, glass, right? Half full with water, or glass with water, and somebody saying that it is half full, and somebody saying it is half empty. That point or the earlier one, Rauna?
So that point itself.
Right.
Yeah.
So now what one is saying is, one is not discounting that these renditions of the world, I mean, the characterization of the glass of water as half full or half empty is unimportant. One is not saying that. But is that all about the glass of water? Is that all about the glass of water? Or, I mean, it's, or is there something else that we can bring to it, etc. Right? And if you look at the situation from within the epistemological turn, then you will say that it is our perspective that we are bringing to it that renders the reality as such. So somebody says half full, somebody says half empty. I mean, somebody says, somebody who sees half full is seen to be kind of an optimist, etc., because full is desirable, right? I mean, at least there is a certain normativity that attaches to a full glass, right? And to see it as half empty or half full, I mean, to see it as half full is to render to the norm more closer than saying that it is half empty, right? So there are strong normativities that underscore our perspectives on the world, right? Etc. So somewhere along the way, I mean, there is so much more we can be saying about that situation of a glass half full or half empty, depending upon how you're seeing it, which is important. Does this clarify, Rauna?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No. Just see, it's just a small switch, right? And in fact, I'm going to make some cautionary notes presently. I'm going to make some, see, one is not talking of a simple transition or a simplistic distinction between ontology and epistemology, right? I mean, okay, etc. But what one is saying is that I mean, there is something about the world. Now, for instance, how do you understand Marx's claim, right? I mean, the claim underscoring Marx's materialism that it is not the consciousness of, it's not consciousness that, what is that? It's not the consciousness of people that determines their existence, but existence that determines their being. So it's not consciousness that determines being, but being that determines consciousness, right? Now, what does this mean, right? Now, surely the idea, there is something material and ontological in privileging existence over consciousness of existence, right? Okay, but then, I mean, one is not saying that consciousness of existence is not important, right? Okay, so somewhere along the way, even as Marx speaks of existence determining consciousness, right, there is a sense in which consciousness itself may be a constitutive aspect of existence, right? So surely that's why Marx has some very interesting notes to offer on how materialism itself has to be informed from within some ideas that are central to a idealist consciousness, as it were. Right? No, and please note, I'm not saying something new. This is something that you have learned as part of your trajectory through Marx, maybe in your undergraduate, and perhaps, and definitely in your postgraduate classes. But maybe maybe the tools, the tools of inquiry, how Marx establishes the theses. I mean, Marx's theses about the world are problematic, but how he goes about setting up the theses is extremely suggestive, right? Etc. And so that's why I'm saying that I don't think, I don't want you all to take this set of lectures that I'm giving on the ontological turn as something setting up a new demand on our inquiries. It's somewhere there in some of the classical thinkers themselves, right? Perhaps we need to extricate the classical thinkers from the overdetermined apparatus of interpretations that have wrought on their frameworks, right? Etc. How many students are aware that even when Durkheim was affirming the primacy of the social, around that same time when Durkheim was asserting the autonomy of the social, there was a central challenge that was posed by another sociologist, thinker, Gabriel Tarde, right? Etc. And Gabriel Tarde was actually trying to argue that there is, I mean, that the social must also incorporate a sense of the psychological, right? Etc. Okay. Although Durkheim's emphasis was you cannot reduce the social to the psychological. The social is a domain in itself, non-reducible to the psychological. Whereas the interpsychological, incidentally, Tarde spoke of the interpsychological domain, etc. Right? And of course, in that standoff between Tarde and Durkheim, somewhere the French sociological field turned more towards Durkheim than towards Tarde. But Tarde is, I mean, for instance, people like Bruno Latour and others actually rediscovered Tarde and then bring him back into the kind of emphasis that they are bringing into the scholarship and so on, right? So what I'm trying to indicate is it's not as though the ontological turn, so to say, is something new, right? Maybe it manifests itself as new, right? But actually, you can go back to the classical beginnings of the discipline and recover ontological orientations coexisting with an epistemological emphasis. So what I'm trying to indicate for you is that, yes, in addressing the question of epistemologies of social science, right, or epistemologies for social science, there is something about the world that social science studies that also needs to be adequate. So, in fact, our tools must become more adequate to the worlds that social science is seeking to address. I mean, you may call the world capitalist, you may call the world, post-capitalist, you may call the world neoliberal, you may call the world, any character, modern, or postmodern, but somewhere along the way there are dimensions of the world that need to be addressed and which pose a challenge to our concepts and categories, right? Am I clear? I mean, somewhat clear. Okay.
So, sir, can we say that we all have different perspectives to beauty? Every culture has its own concept of beauty. So, the different perspectives are due to the difference in worldviews, uh,
Yeah,
not due to the difference in worldviews, but it is due to the structure of beauty itself,
yeah, yeah.
essence of beauty itself.
Yeah, yeah. So, yes. I mean, no, but the point is that, I mean, it's one thing to say that you can have different conceptions of beauty. I mean, you can have different conceptions of beauty. You can have different perspectives on beauty. It's another to address uh, the concept of the beautiful itself. Right? And that's why, for instance, a lot of philosophers also make a distinction between the beautiful and the sublime, right? Etc. So somewhere there is something about the nature of the beautiful that our perspectives, that of course that our perspectives is not capturing or capturing whatever it might be, etc. But the point is, in the emphasis on the ontological, the perspectival, the kind of centrality that you give to the perspectival is reduced. This is all I have to clarify for you, Nitish, right? Because you started the first, when you posed the question, you were posing the question from within the epistemological, that it is our perspectives that make the world. So we can have different conceptions of beauty, and those different conceptions of beauty can come from our difference of worldviews or the structure, etc., and so on, right? But the point is, this difference also needs to be articulated, right? The difference between perspectives on the world also needs to be articulated, and it's quite possible that the different perspectives are actually addressing different worlds. So somebody conceives of beauty in one kind of a way, somebody else conceives of beauty in another kind of a way. I mean, there are stories about the Taj Mahal, for instance. People speak about, exquisite architecture in the Taj Mahal. Some other, and there is this famous apocryphal story of some Soviet president coming and saying, what a shame, or something like that. I mean, somebody might look at the labor that went into the making of the Taj Mahal, right? Somebody may speak about a certain history of desire that participates in the Taj Mahal. But the fact is that the Taj Mahal, right, is all this, right? So it's not, so somewhere along the way, the object itself, comes to be rendered as much more complex than what our perspectives are making of it. Does this clarify, Nitish?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. No, it's just a small switch that we need to be making. I mean, that's why I've always asked the student, what does it mean to say? I mean, look at the switch that Marx effects. I mean, according to Marx, a lot of philosophy privileges consciousness over existence. So it's not, so that's why against that privileging, Marx emphasizes it is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but their being that determines their consciousness. Now the focus on being, right, modes of existing is crucial, right? But nevertheless, there is still a certain epistemological overemphasis that you can read in Marx's writing, although its basic inspiration is ontological, right? That's why I'm saying that don't see, that's why the fusion of epistemology and ontology is critical and not I mean, many times the fusion is done from one end of it rather than across it, right? So when people fuse epistemology and ontology, they may be, in a sense, privileging knowing over existing, or privileging existing over knowing, right? And I don't think either of these binaries is adequate, right? Etc. That's why let me move ahead. That's why the point I'm going to I'm making is that we need to be very cautious and wary of any simplistic distinction or transition between ontology and epistemology, or epistemology and ontology. Okay. Okay. Now, in other words, what I'm trying to point out is that any attempt to engage with knowledge making, how knowledge gets to be made in the social sciences, any interrogation of knowledge making, and incidentally, this is one important rationale for our course. Okay, I mean, our interrogation of knowledge making can hardly be described as purely a study of conceptual or cognitive perspectives, right? Etc. In fact, our focus on knowledge, that's why knowing the social world, right? Our interrogation of knowledge making about the social world, okay, is not merely, an engagement with the kind of conceptual and cognitive perspectives on the world that have dominated. Okay. In other words, there is more to representation. I mean, in fact, this word, there is more to representation than some sort of epistemological or metaphysical construct, right? Okay, etc. Okay. Now, in other words, the challenge for us, as indeed for our course, and indeed for any research, the challenge is to reconcile claims about the ontological composition of the world, okay, with more conventional propositions about social construction of the world, or the performative constitution of a certain reality, and so on. Yeah. Is there any question? I mean, okay. Now, in fact, as our course will proceed, the constructivist emphasis, right? The constructivist emphasis on focus on our concepts, on our modes of discourse, etc., that underlie the social world must coexist with, right? Our needs to be combined with an engagement which focuses on the instrumental, the performative, and the material dimensions implied in the making of facts and artifacts. In fact, in the next segment of our course, I will pose this question about naive realism versus, kind of absolute social constructionism, right? So, and surely naive realism is a problem. Absolute social constructivism, that everything is constructed, is also a problem. And so on. That's why the constructivist emphasis on knowledge and the making of knowledge, okay, needs to be combined with, or coexist with a focus which argues that there is a world out there, okay, which also needs to be addressed, even as the world may be positioned differently by different subjects and so on, right, etc. So you find that by moving away, okay, from questions of knowledge and representation, right, I think or at least by moving away from conventional questions about knowledge and representation. Okay. Okay. Now, I think the focus is on the ways in which objects are enacted in practices, right, etc. Okay. In fact, the concept of enactment, ENACTMENT, or the concept of enact, okay, are actually key terms that underlie the ontological term, right? Okay, and somewhere along the way, that we need to get a new measure of this enactment of social reality that the ontological turn is seeking to address, and so on, right? So somewhere along the way, it's one thing to say that everything is socially constructed, everything is enacted in practices, okay, but there are practices themselves, even as those practices are constantly mutating, right? So somewhere along the way, it's important for us to understand practices as almost as much as given as they are being constructed differently by different people, etc. Right? Okay. And now, for instance, I have a student who's presently working on a MPhil with me, which is, there is this popular and seriously interesting ritual among in Kerala called Theyyam, right? The Theyyatam, etc. But this student of mine is interested not at the ritual, but one element that features in this ritual, the song, the Thottam, right? Now, like, and she's very clear that she's not, of course, the song has a life in the ritual, but it has a life independent of the ritual as well. And we are trying to address the life of the song, both in the ritual and outside of it, right? Etc. So what we, in fact, if a student is interested in the Theyyam, for instance, the Theyyam itself is actually a composition of practices. You need to break it down, right? And etc. And in addressing the composition of practices, it's interesting to see how the overall ritual assembles these different practices to actually translate into the Theyyam and so on. I mean, this is just an example that I'm giving you out of the air. I can give you multiple examples of this kind and so on. So it's one thing to say that there is no real, that everything is constructed. It's another to say that the construction is being effected in a particular kind of a way. Different, I mean, the example that Nitish gave about beauty, about something beautiful, being looked at from different points of view. Different people have different conceptions of something which is beautiful, which can be explained in terms of their structural locations, their worldviews as part of that location, right? But that is as real, right? That the different conception of the beautiful is as real as something that is rendered as beautiful itself, in itself, and so on. So the construction needs to be explained, just as the construction gives us a sense of the real. We will engage with this in the next class, in the next set of lectures on paradigms and epistemologies of research, the standard picture and beyond. I will engage with this theme a little more systematically by constructing different styles of thinking about research, and I will be setting up a binary between two styles of research. I won't be. I will only be using a neutral classification. I won't be giving a name to those styles. I will be rendering the styles in some fullness, and then try to actually see what are the implications of a standoff between these two styles and how we can mediate between these two styles. So it's one thing to, I mean, there is something real about a construction, right? So there is something, I mean, and it's important to engage the reality of the construction just as reality itself is constructed and so on. So the example that Rose gave earlier, and I'm just alluding to examples that some of you all have given, I mean, about a glass situation with a glass of water which is half full and renditions of it. And it's interesting to see why somebody renders it as half full, somebody renders it as half empty, right? And what is the normativity that attaches to that situation, as it were. So there is something ripe in that situation that needs to be addressed. Which that's why I think I'd said that somewhere along the way the hermeneutics of suspicion, okay, I mean, we need to sound the limits of the hermeneutics of suspicion, right? Of course, critique is important, critical thinking is important, okay, but many times, if the terms of critique are preset by our theoretical apparatuses, then the kind of readings that come to be produced by preset theoretical concepts and practices can result in very dull and boring reading. So I think it's important that social sciences, being the social sciences, nurse a more descriptive orientation, right? And I think a certain critical balance between epistemology and ontology is essentially one critical way by which this descriptive orientation can be sustained and nursed in productive ways. Let me stop there by way of the lecture, and if there are any questions, I can take them on.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, please. And let me just clarify also. I mean, if please don't feel hesitant to ask questions. And I mean, if somebody is frequently asking questions, please do so. I have no problem at all with that. And don't be hesitant in asking questions, because a lot of things get clarified in the context of questions and so on. Otherwise, I can just be going round and round, the poem, the round and round the mulberry bush. Okay. Yeah. Yes, Rose.
Sir, I don't know if this makes sense. Like, how does this happen? The politics of labeling when you fuse epistemology and ontology. Because epistemology brings in different perspectives. Ontology speaks of what exists there. So how do we label things? How do we call them by a name? If you give them a name, will we be actually privileging one perspective over another? So the politics of labeling, how does that happen?
Yes. I mean, in fact, you said that I mean, it's one thing to say labeling. It's another to speak of a politics of labeling. If you say there is a politics to that labeling, then you are also trying to give certain existential coordinates that attach to why people label certain things in the way they do. Right? Okay. All of us classify, all of us work with categories and labels. We give names to things, right? I agree. I mean, we are representing beings. I mean, in fact, Hacking says this, that it's one thing to say that human beings are, there are different characterizations of human beings. I mean, Dumo calls Indians as Homo hierarchicus, and looks at the modern European as Homo equalis. Likewise, you can have Homo faber, right? Human beings as a tool-making animal, Homo faber, Homo sapiens. These are different characterizations, or Homo representus. I mean, in fact, I mean that we constantly keep classifying things, in different kinds of ways, and that is a human attribute, as it were. But then there are different ways of classifying the world, right? Why do certain people in classifying the world not make a distinction between the human world and the natural world? Why does modern people make this distinction between the human world and the natural world, right? Or or some people blur the distinction between the human and the non-human, but there are worlds in which the distinction between the human and the non-human is kept very tight, and also in a sense, controlled and manipulated in particular kinds of ways, etc. So what I'm trying to indicate is that surely, the fact that there is a certain philosophical anthropology that attaches to being human, right, etc. And this doesn't necessarily imply that we are all human in the same way. So our humanity expresses itself in different ways. So there are different ontologies that of being human, so to say, right? And somewhere I think we need to understand the ontologies that inform the ways in which we look at the world. So the looking at the world is as important as the ontologies that go into the making of the world. Does that help? Does that clarify? I mean, no, you're not confused, Rose. I mean, I think you're very clear. There's no doubt.
Sir, yes, sir. I got it. It's really interesting. The whole discussion is really interesting, but it's a little confusing too, as you have to just unlearn a little and then relearn a little. So.
Yes. No. I think the confusion. I mean, you're absolutely right that it is interesting, but it can also. I mean, it's also puts you in a muddle. I mean, I don't think it is confusion. It puts you in a muddle, right? I think the fact is that it's important to understand this rule. Take any object. An object exists. An object can also be made known, right? Somebody might argue it's only when an object is made known that we begin to posit its existence, right? Somebody else may argue that an object exists independent of being made known, right? Now, but knowing is as important as existing, right? Etc. So you need to break down these ideas along these lines. That's why I'm saying that, look, it's almost like, that you're trying to break down a certain system of thought into constitutive elements. In fact, I'm always fond of repeating this. I mean, we have a lot of theory, we have a lot of methods and so on, but ultimately, what is social science about? It is about demography and geography, right? I mean, there are people, demography, and they live in a place. They are located somewhere. Geography. Then what complicates the relationship between demography and geography? I mean, the geography could include also your natural environment, right? What complicates the relationship between demography and geography is actually history, right? I mean, that of events that come, some of which you produce, the demography produces, the geography produces, and then there are also other circumstances that come in and so on. So we clutter our heads with too many ideas, and actually it's important that we actually disaggregate, reassemble, as it were, and I'm absolutely sure things will become much clearer in the process. I mean, otherwise, see, we are all over-determined. You know, I'm fond. I mean, we are all over-determined by our way, our perspectives, what we have learned, the way in which we have been socialized, and so on. We are all over-determined by our socialization, right? But somewhere along the way, I mean, there are ways in which we steer through this inevitable socialization, right? Etc. That's why I'm always fond of repeating this, that the capacity to be human, you know, is not denying determination, that you are determined by something else, but your ability to steer between different determinations, right? That is what makes the human an extremely interesting object for study. I'm becoming a philosopher here, and so on. And are there any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions that students have? I mean, I can, you know, I'm a little keen to incorporate some of your questions also into the video recording, because once you listen to it, you can also, you know, sometimes sort your trajectory through the question, as it were. Now, in fact, I will formulate before then. I will now that we have finished one small segment of the course, I will formulate some questions from it, right? And I will announce it to the class. Okay. I mean, there are one or two questions on the basis of these 3 lectures that I've given you. I can formulate certain questions that you can mull over and try to look at the material through those questions, as it were, right? I generally do it after each part is completed, but you know, I can even do it. I mean, there are 3 parts in the course, and so after each part is completed, I give a set of questions. But I can even break it down and give you, after each segment is completed, I can give you a set of questions, and you can, you know, try to find your way through it along these lines and so on. Okay. Say yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. And let me just